Good afternoon. Just wanted to come along and do a short video today looking at the headstone of a pretty remarkable individual who's buried in the churchyard at Purton in North Herts at St Mary's Church. This is the headstone of one Trooper George Arnold, late of the 16th Light Dragoons. We can see here that George served throughout the Peninsular War, see in action at some of the key events such as the Battle of Badajoz, Salamanca, Talavera, Fuentes de Oñoro, Vitoria, and finishing his career in 1815 at the famous Battle of Waterloo. It's quite rare actually to find a headstone to a simple trooper who wasn't a particularly rich man, but the story about how his headstone came here is really quite a remarkable one, and one that tells of the kind of esteem that this man was held with in his later life. Since the Battle of Waterloo, very little is known of George. He disappears in terms of records, although he does appear once in 1822 as a record of a Chelsea pensioner, where he is noted as being discharged from the army, subject to old age and rheumatism. And it's over 40 years until he's next seen again, and that's when the Vicar of Purton, the Reverend Lindsay Loughborough, writes an article which appears in November 1868 in the Times, and really paints an incredible picture of this man. And it reads: "Sir, crowded as your columns are at this time with election news, I yet venture to crave a small space for an appeal to your numerous readers on behalf of an old parishioner whose case is one deserving of sympathy. George Arnold, who will complete his 90th year in January next, enlisted early in life in the then 16th Light Dragoons, and after a brief sojourn in Ireland embarked for the Peninsula in 1809, and, with the exception of about 6 months, was abroad until he entered Paris with his regiment in 1815. He was at the taking of Badajoz, and in the thick of Salamanca, Talavera, Fuentes de Oñoro, Vitoria, and the crowning fight at Waterloo. He left the army soon after the peace with a pension of £1 a day, which is his sole remaining means of subsistence, and when from it is deducted the amount paid for rent and firing, there is not much left for food and clothing. The old man is in fair health considering his age, and still shows a soldierly bearing, with some sparks of the ancient fire when fighting his battles over again. I have known him for several years, and have never heard him complain, but always express himself in terms of thankfulness for any little act of kindness. I am very anxious to add to the old man's comfort during his few remaining days, and should be thankful to any of your readers who would aid me in doing so, if you will kindly permit this appeal to appear in your columns. I am, sir, your faithful servant, R. Lindsay Loughborough." It's great to know that the readers of the Times responded to this appeal very well, and as a result, a huge amount of money came forward to help George in his final years. As we can see from the headstone, he died in February of 1869, just 3 months after the appeal originally went into the paper, and so sadly he didn't have long to enjoy his newfound comfort. But what the appeal did do was to raise money, which in the end paid for a headstone, which is this very one we look at here. Otherwise he would never have been able to afford. And it's not quite the end of the story, as over the years George's story faded from history, along with his headstone, which up until last had faded to the point to be illegible. But George was one of those individuals whose stories really did strike a chord as being something quite special, and it was the discovery of this very article, in fact, in the Times archive last year, that led to a new appeal in exactly the same paper, albeit some 150 years later, which ultimately allowed for this man to be remembered once more with a dedication ceremony on the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo, where George's reinstated headstone was replaced here at the Church of St Mary's in the village of Purton in Hertfordshire.